Got the back over here. Is that good, Joe? All right. We're going to get started with our first Lunch and Learn of the season, which is on responsive classroom. And I want to thank everyone for coming. And online too, we have 5 people. Is that correct? 6 people? 6 people joining us online. So, this shows an investment on your part and a partnership with the school, which is really exciting. We tried to create some opportunities for everyone to engage and learn. And it's important for parents to know kind of what's going on in the school. And, this responsive classroom curriculum was thought about about 2 years ago and then really kind of took off last year. And this year it's kind of now widespread throughout our entire junior school campus here. Now, when we say we use responsive classroom, what we're really talking about is taking something and using some best practices. We're not using it exclusively and to the fullest, but we are taking parts of it, and part of the schedule reconstruction was to make sure that there was intentional time to have an opportunity to have responsive classroom embedded within the daily practice. So we have 2 teachers here. We have our 3rd grade team. We have Mr. Stern, who has been here, you tell me. 14 we'll call it. And kind of has been a pioneer at the school with responsive classroom. And then we have Christina Blazin, who has been here for 2 years, but not naive to this. She came from Swickley for 12 years. Was that right on that? So both 14. Yeah, look at that. And she had also been using responsive classroom at Swickley Academy. So I'm going to hand it off to them. There's certainly be time for questions. And certainly if there's anyone online that has questions, Jody, our tech integrations specialist, will be fielding those questions and having a rich conversation. So thanks for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Mathis. Again, I'm Dan, and we are happy to have you here. Those of you that were able to join us in person and online, thank you for spending some time with us. Christina and I are excited. We usually do not get to spend our lunch hour or our lunchtime with adults, so this is a bit of a different feel, but we're happy to talk about responsive classroom today. And those of you who are here, you did see our welcome message. This is kind of, and if you're online, I know it's hard to read that, but there's a welcome message that we typically use in our classroom to welcome and greet our students every morning. And so sometimes there is an engagement piece and a prompt piece, but I'm going to pass it over and let you introduce yourself again, if you'd like.
Yes. So I'm Christina Blazin. I teach 3rd grade as well, and I've been using responsive classroom for about 10 years now. I've been trained in many different levels of the program, which we're going to talk about. But with the message, just as we asked you to interact when you came in, that is what we ask students to do. It usually gives them a heads up about something that's happening in the day, what we're going to be doing, giving them something to do, maybe chatting with each other, and then gives us a prompt that we might discuss or use in our meeting. So we're going to ask you to humor us as well, to kind of step into that role of being a student, because when we have our morning meetings together, we always start with a greeting. And so Mr. Stern's going to tell us about one of his favorite greetings to use.
That's right. So this doesn't actually look like the greeting we may have on our own smart boards. This one is sort of a mock-up of more of an interactive one that we'll use in a minute. And I just wanted to add quickly that, I am learning a lot from Christina's experience with responsive classroom. I'm newer to the game, and so I'm using her experiences and the practices that she's using, that she's helping filter throughout the junior school. We have sort of a layout today that will simulate some of those experiences that our children are having. So we look forward to sharing those with you today. And before we move into a greeting, I don't know about you, Christina, but I do like to also add in my experiences or start a message with some of my ideas to get the ball rolling with our students. So I think about a positive memory from my elementary school years, and I instantly think of my 4th grade teacher, Mr. Sarver, who was my only male teacher, but he would come outside and play with us, and I can remember some very competitive soccer games and football games on the playground with Mr. Sarver. So that's one that always sticks to my memory. Does anyone else want to share one before we move on? Before we move on, we have a couple Post-its up here, or Mrs. Blazin.
for myself, a positive memory I have is I remember around 3rd or 4th grade the jump in like organization. I remember getting to have like my own special school supplies and like my binder and my folder and feeling very organized and that like I knew what I was supposed to do instead of my parents kind of helping me with that. And that has definitely stuck with me as who I am as a person. So I really, it doesn't surprise me that that's kind of what sticks out, but I did really enjoy that feeling of independence that came in my later elementary school years.
Great. Well, we'll switch to the greeting. This afternoon, you can see that there's a few choices on the screen. This is technically like an interactive dice that we may use from time to time, not every day certainly, but to give a little different role in some of our greetings. And so instead of using the interactive dice this afternoon, we just ask you to pick a greeting. You can see there are 6 different choices here. And find a friend in the room. I know it's an intimate, small crowd here, but if you find a friend to exchange a greeting, we can model that for you as well, because modeling is a huge component of what we're doing in this program. And it's important that when we share greetings, we provide eye contact with our neighbors or who we're greeting, and that we also include our names. And so for this, it's a fun one. You can choose what you would like to do. And so I will bow and say, good afternoon, Mrs. Blazin. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And Mr. Stern, should I choose the same greeting back to you?
Your
or
choice
can I
today.
choose
Your
my own?
choice.
All right, I'm going to say, good afternoon, Mr. Stern. It's nice to see you.
Likewise. So we invite you to now do that with a friend in the room, and we can hop in if we need to. Please share names.
Good afternoon. My name is Brad.
Good afternoon, I'm Molly. Nice to
Molly.
meet you.
Brad.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
I'm Brad.
Hi, I'm Molly. I'm good at this. We have to do math.
You want to move it closer?
So we're seeing that we're having a glare with the lighting. So maybe we could also take care of the lights. Online they can't see the screen. Although I believe the presentation was shared with everyone as well. Thank you for engaging in that greeting. We typically, of course, would have our greetings with a kind of a start to our morning meeting. And we also would meet together, usually in a circle form, gathering together to start each day. And so we can move forward.
Let's do that. So just a little bit about the program, Responsive Classroom. It is a wide-reaching program that has a lot of different components to it. It is an international program. It's used around the world. As a teacher, it's always fun to look at where those trainings are around the world. Be like, oh, I'd love to go to Paris for a training. But there are trainings regionally. There are national conferences, and it covers a lot of elements of the day, not just the idea of morning meeting. But it is a program that is based around building positive relationships with students and among students. So as you maybe just felt having to greet someone that you might not have known, you smile, you talk to someone, and just getting your day started in that way is a really positive experience for the students. And then it also does focus on engaging in meaningful academics. So there's a big academic component to it, and what that looks like, as teachers planning activities, being very intentional about that work that we're laying the groundwork in the relationships, and then how that looks in engaging academics.
Let me add on to
As
that
opposed
before
to
we
not
back
doing
up for a
that?
second. You want to back one up?
Like,
So-
what's the impetus behind
Sorry.
it? Was it not happening? Were those
We're at-
wonderful, positive things not
Yeah.
occurring for 100 years?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We're actually going to mention that briefly, but if we can go back up one slide.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll just
sure.
add on to that because you kind of segued us right to what I was going to share there. By no means are we stating that up until, like Dr. Mathis said, we've taken on the responsive classroom practice. By no means are the elements lacking or missing prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, we're taking this program to kind of structure our days and our times. But prior to a couple years ago, if you talk about the junior school specifically, there were elements and components of this practice that were existing, certainly, such as morning meetings, a morning message. Prior to a couple years ago, those were happening. But the framework is what we're kind of sharing today, and it goes well beyond just a simple component such as a morning message. But we did formally have a training opportunity here 2 summers ago, and so some of the current teachers were a part of that training. Other teachers have come to Shady Side with background in this practice and as well as other training opportunities. And then even if there were teachers that missed out on that summer curriculum opportunity, they have branched out or gone to a training on their own since then. And so looking at today and what it looks like at the junior school, it's also important to know that some of the same components may feel different in a 3rd grade classroom than they would in a pre-K classroom or a 5th grade classroom, although we're following a similar structure. I would also add that we are, as Dr. Mathis said, using this as the framework. So we are able to have the autonomy to choose how and where we utilize those practices as well as how they connect with our academic focus. And so we'll talk a little more about that academic piece that we can filter in because that certainly feels different among different grade levels. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the 2 bullet points under there, I would hope that every school builds positive relationships with students and then provides meaningful. So my question is, what was the impetus? What was the reason why, whether you did this or whomever developed this theory, why? Why is it new? Why is it good?
Well, this program itself has actually been around for 40 years, so it's certainly, elements of it were existing already, I think, and my experience with it is that it really just gives teachers that framework to say that there are these different elements of the day and gives some structure to it. And having a school that is, students or parents, teachers are being trained in that, provides some alignment. The language that's being used, students know, okay, we're having this meeting and it's called a morning meeting, where some teachers might call it like a gathering circle or not have a name for it, so just knowing that language and what's expected. And we'll get into the different components, and that language around it helps students to know that the expectation kind of stays the same. And being in a school where I came from that implemented it, as students had the program year after year, it was really amazing to see the difference in the way teachers spoke with students, the way that students spoke with students, and great teaching was already happening, great interactions between students already, but just that alignment between really, it made a difference in behavior challenges that we faced, even academic challenges, or the way that teachers approach those academic challenges changed the longer the program was in place.
I'll add to, I also think that, as I mentioned this quote the other day, but if something's important, you make it intentional, right? So obviously building positive relationships is something that you would hope happens in a school, but to carve time out intentionally to practice those skill sets for kids is something that we really looked at in redesigning the schedule. So it does happen naturally, and it should in schools, both of those things, but carving the time out and making it intentional was our point there.
Good.
All right. Oh, goodness gracious.
There.
All right. So what does this look like at Shady Side in the junior school? In all classrooms in the junior school, you'll see a morning meeting happening. And so that is an important part of the day. We start with the message, and the students come in, they're busy. Once everybody kind of gets in, gets settled, then teachers might use a chime or a different signal to bring students to the carpet area or the circle. And it is important that students are sitting in a circle. We make sure that everybody can be seen, that nobody's back is to anybody, that everybody can see one another. And we start with a greeting. And that greeting involves looking at one another. So we practice eye contact. We talk about how to shake hands. We talk about, looking at someone and saying their name and making them feel included and welcome. Oftentimes students might come in the morning and get busy with something and really not have much of a chance to interact with their peers, and having that really intentional time for students to greet one another is the point. And we do that, in sometimes some silly ways. We sometimes do it in more serious ways. It can be combined with a sharing opportunity, or sometimes that share will be separate. So the share is also something that's very intentional. So if we were doing a formal morning meeting, we might have had you talk with your partners or someone close to you about what you shared on our message, something that was important to you about your elementary school years or a positive memory. So it's a nice intentional time to also practice those skills of how we speak to one another. So we talk about how to turn and look someone in the eye, and how to piggyback off of what someone has said, or how to give validation to what someone has said, and really directly teaching those social skills that sometimes we take for granted that children are just learning through their general interactions, but to pause and say, okay, someone has shared, let's talk about how we can ask 3 questions that might get them to tell more information. Not just a yes or no question. What are those questions that might be asked? Or to share a connection that you have. So it's a really direct, intentional time where students have a chance to talk about what's on their mind or what they want to talk about, depending on the prompt, and then to do that in a positive way. Also, an element of the morning meeting is an activity. And so usually that is something that is silly. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to sometimes get them moving, get them thinking in some ways. And the purpose behind that, and Responsive Classroom says, is that the morning meeting is supposed to give students a sense of joy, belonging, and that brings more engaging and meaningful academics. So the students that feel safe with each other to do a funny dance in the morning are going to feel safe with each other when they're trying a math problem, and that feels hard for them. So we have a short video that we will show you, so you'll get to see some of that morning meeting in action with our students just from over the last couple of days. Do you want to talk about quiet time?
Sure. Before we move on to quiet time, I'll just piggyback and add on a couple ideas. The other importance with sharing is opening that opportunity up for students to engage with each other. And I really think as the year progresses, you start to see students pick up on the cues to respond instead of simply waiting for their turn to speak, simply waiting for their turn to share whatever they're focusing on, but to really listen and understand that we can continue that point that another partner might have shared and build onto that point and to grow that conversation.
Can I add something to that? Maybe
Sure,
think of,
yeah.
So with that sharing, it does carry over then into the academics later on in the day. When we ask them to share, something that you did over the weekend, or what did you eat for dinner last night, or something like that, then when we ask them to share about, a response to an article we read in social studies, they have those skills in place already to be able to have that academic conversation because we laid the groundwork in the morning meeting for what having a conversation looks like.
So we can move on to another component, which is quiet time. We also had many classes prior to 2 years ago implementing quiet time in their daily schedule. And it also is a choice time. It's a time for students to think about their day and to refocus. Oftentimes it might happen after a lunch and recess period, but it's not locked into that part of the schedule. We find in 3rd grade that it is a healthy time to have quiet time, to give the students a sense of calm, to give the students a sense of reset for the remainder of the school day. And sometimes there are some specific activities or there are specific options that we as the teachers might facilitate, that these are your choices. Other times, as they become more aware of what works for them, you can kind of gauge on whether or not they're ready to make some of those independent choices. And just like any of the other components, that evolves as the school year progresses. And so some of the activities or the shares that require more risks, we wouldn't do during the first week of school. We want them to be, again, continue to build that sense of feeling like they're a part of our community and that we're building that community within our homeroom, and that then as they become more comfortable, they have those opportunities to take more risks without feeling embarrassed. And that does, again, evolve as the school year progresses. Anything else to add on with quiet time?
Yeah, I was just going to start. So quiet time is about 10 to 15 minutes usually. It's not a very long chunk of time, and it does start pretty structured at the beginning. We might say you can read or you can draw, or you could sit at your desk or somewhere around the room, and that as the year goes on can become sometimes. Last year I had students that were creating 3D things out of paper that they were adding on to each day, or I had a student who wanted to make a multiplication chart. Students who were writing stories. I had students somebody was writing one day and then they'd switch and they'd add on to each other's stories, and just that time to sort of be creative in a way that they choose. But I've also seen students, especially in upper elementary, that begin to use that time almost like a study hall, where they're like, I have soccer practice tonight. Like, I need to use this 10 minutes to get my math homework done. And it's not something that's forced. It becomes a choice where they start to see like, oh, this is time in my day, and let me make a wise choice about that time. So it's nice, just to have that quiet time for them to choose what's best for me at this moment. It's also time some students just choose to like lay their head down on the desk for a minute, where that's okay if they do that. We'll usually put on like quiet music and dim the lights, and it's just a relaxed time.
Yeah, the final thought there is also, this year especially, I'm noticing students that want to continue something that happened in a previous class in the morning. For example, writing workshop. I have a lot of writers that don't want to stop their story or their momentum when we go to lunch and recess, and so they'll ask, Mr. Stern, can we leave our writing notebooks out for quiet time? A lot of days we will set the room up so that when they return from lunch and recess, they can go right to their spot. It should be a still moment and time where, again, in that 10 or 15 minutes, there's not a lot of bustle in the room. They're not moving around from place to place. They have their supplies that they want to use, and maybe that supply is just themselves. Like you said, a lot of kids want to use that as a time to reset, maybe rest, and even meditate to prep for this afternoon.
Absolutely. So another element that happens during the day are energizers, and teachers call them brain boosts. Usually they're things that have been done as activities at morning meeting, where they've been kind of formally taught how to sing a song safely or do a dance, or you'll see in the video a version of rock, paper, scissors that they know how to play. And so sometimes when they've had a long block of academic time and they're moving from one to the other, it's nice to just take 3 minutes and do that activity with them, and it just gets them moving, it gets them laughing, it gets them talking with each other, and really the academics that follow become much more successful. The students are more focused because they've had that exercise, they've had that energy out, they've had a chance to talk and move, and then what follows after tends to go much more smoothly because the students are more focused for that.
Additionally, with the brain boosts or energizers, sometimes it is teacher-led, and sometimes we may have a resource on the smartboard leading a brain boost. Many teachers use websites like Go Noodle or other engaging components to have the smartboard engaging the activity or the energizer. I also know that there are a lot of teachers that have a go-to stock of activities. Mine are on a popsicle stick or a set of popsicle sticks, and just have a kid or a few teachers might pull them randomly and get the kids moving in different ways around the room. And that can help, especially in between larger academic times. If you have, a full reading and writing workshop class back to back, to mix that up a little bit, to give the kids a chance to move and wiggle and to engage in some type of fun activity is nice to see, and they rely on that as well. So it's a helpful and healthy part of the day. Lastly on the screen we see closing circle as well, and closing circle is a way to sort of culminate each day and bring the class together to possibly reflect on a part of the day. It could be posed around a reflection question that we sort of assign as a discussion point with the class. It might also be a time where we're not reflecting, but we're maybe doing a fun trivia question, or we are engaging in some other smaller, shorter component that brings the class back together. It is important to have that closure at the end of each school day and to reestablish that sense of calm before they leave the class. And I think that it can be a case where we move through our schedule and we're expecting students to do a lot in the course of a school day, and we also find that positive tone to end the day does help sort of exit in a calm fashion and sort of have sort of a stamp on the end of the day going forward. And we know our students are very busy. Oftentimes the end of our school day is not the end of their day. They're running off to an after school class or a soccer match or whatever their evening activities are. And so we want to use that opportunity at Closing Circle to again once more come together in similar fashion that we started the day. Do you want to add on to Closing Circle or pass on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. It's just one of those intentional moments of building that connection with the students. And the research shows that when teachers are more connected with the students and when they're connected with each other, that they do have a more successful academic experience. So, we talk a lot about, especially at the beginning of the year, there's a book over here called The First 6 Weeks, like really laying the groundwork for just this format in the day and building that community and how beneficial that is to everything that comes after in the year. This certainly continues, but building all of the routines and what's expected and how we speak to one another and what that looks like when we're doing something fun and silly versus something that is more focused. It certainly does make a difference in how the students learn and respond to learning and challenging situations as the year goes on.
So that was a lot of information with those
Yeah.
components. We can stop for questions, or if there's any online question, we can always pause. And as Christina mentioned, we do have a video which sort of captures these components from some recent clips in the 3rd grade classroom. Does anyone have any questions before we go to the video? Good? Okay.
Do you want to put that? I don't know if they can see it at home or. These are just a couple examples of morning messages, what they would look like in a 3rd grade classroom. So there's some. Go ahead. Do you want to?
Well, I was just going to add to that. If you didn't hear Christina, these are messages that we could have flipped to. And earlier we spoke about the academic piece that ties into sometimes our morning message or sometimes the morning meeting. Here's another example that you can see that we as teachers would intentionally insert some of our academic components. This one on the left is referring to a couple habits of mind in a STEM class that was going to occur that day. And so to get their minds prepared and set for an activity. Other times it might be something that would be them engaging in a way to maybe find a grammatical error or a spelling error. Maybe there's a math question involved. This morning I actually added a math question in my morning meeting because we were going to have a math test later in the day. And so finding ways to tie that in as opposed to simply just a welcome message is another way that we connect that academic piece.
Yeah, absolutely. The leaving all the punctuation marks out is a really fun one where the students are like, wait, what's happening? It's like, oh, this is really challenging to read without periods in it, or pointing out some things if we're practicing editing skills. I like to do, sometimes I'll write the whole alphabet and I'll say, we've been learning about, the pioneers in social studies. Let's see if we can fill in A to Z, something that has to do with pioneers, and getting them to kind of brainstorm and think about things and just getting their brain in that academic setting for the day. Is there volume? Is it set, Jody, the volume?
I think that we have morning meeting to greet all of our classmates and get ready for the day. I really like making people feel better when they are sad or they are feeling happy in the mornings when we do morning meeting. I like morning meeting because I like the morning meeting handshakes because they're kind of fun. Good morning. I hope you enjoyed the long weekend. Anything new or good happening in your life? We'll have a chance to share at the morning meeting.
The rest of the time, we'll
because it's once you come back from lunch, it's very, very noisy, and then quiet times where you can reset into the day and you're all ready.
I like quiet time because it gives me a chance to rest.
I like quiet quiet time because you can express your feelings and it's quiet. And it's like an activity where you can do stuff when you're home. I think we have quiet time because it's a nice time for us just to relax and do something that we want that's not too busy. I think we have quiet time because after lunch we have to have time to digest for PE. I like quiet time because I get to draw.
I like to do energizers because they're fun.
I think that we do energizers because they get us ready for the day and they're fun and silly. I'm excited for doing art projects in our group. Like I'm excited. I'm excited.
All right, so we are going to switch gears a little bit, and we better grab that. We're going to switch gears a little bit and leave those components of the day to talk about some other elements of responsive classroom that can be put into place and that we're utilizing outside of sort of those structured, scheduled periods. And so Mrs. Blazin is going to talk about teacher language first.
Yeah, so certainly as teachers, we're helping to mold behaviors of students. We want to encourage the positive. And the way that we try to do that is through our language. So we say things like, I noticed that, we lined up in under 1 minute to transition to get to art today. That really helped us to be respectful of Mrs. Irwin's time to get there so that we can start class and you can have the most time for art. So really framing our language around the positives and what we're noticing that's going well and why it is helping them to do something in their day. If students are not doing what they're supposed to, we might say, please remind us how we should be walking in line to make sure that we don't disturb the kindergarten class while we walk by. And using that reminding language and that reinforcing language really helps students to be their best selves and to remember those rules that they're trying to follow at school and the way that is respectful of everyone. And so we actually do have a handout for you with some of this language. I know as a parent of a 3-year-old, I find that I use this language at home, like, please remind me where we should put our clothes after we, are changing into our pajamas, and the laundry basket, those sorts of things, that as a parent it might be helpful to know that that's kind of the language that the teachers here at school are using. It's really not intended to be punitive in any way. We don't want to say, this student is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but saying, can you remind me what we should be doing? And most times students right away are like, oh, yep, I know the right thing that I'm supposed to be doing, which is just a really helpful, positive way to mold those behaviors, as opposed to, necessarily saying, I noticed that, Mr. Stern is in line and quiet, and pointing out like the one student, just saying like, I noticed we all did this, or this helps us to be fun and exciting and safe for everyone. Really pointing out the positives and being intentional about that. So we actually have a list of sort of like sentence starters. And I know even for myself, I keep that in the front of my plan book and I look at it to say, I'm going to really, try to use this one or this one today. And it really helps, as Mr. Mathis said, to just be really intentional about the way that we're speaking to children with respect, and as we're modeling for them how to speak with respect to one another. I've even noticed that the students start to use that language with each other. Sometimes, like they'll be asking to line up and they'll be like, remind us how we're supposed to, be in line right now, instead of saying like, stop running or stop doing it, just remind us what we should be doing. And so they're using that positive language as well with each other. And I taught 5th grade for many years before, and especially with 5th graders in group work, I would notice them using that language with each other. Like, I noticed that you, put your name on this. Like, we should all put our name on it too. Thanks for reminding us of that. And just really being positive with one another. So that can be something that you can certainly take home today. And I'm sure Jody will help us to share that out. So I think we actually do have a little slide of it here. So this is just kind of what we call our little cheat sheet that we are happy to share with you, to remind us how we should do something, or, did you notice that you did this and that was really great, pointing out, making those connections for students. So.
refresh your slide deck real quick. I changed your background colors to see if it would show up better for everybody online. Just go out of full screen and refresh. And put that in.
Hopefully that will help us
Ooh.
see everything a little clearer.
Any better?
It's okay for this.
So we're going to segue and link to logical consequences, which does use very similar ideas around teacher-directed language and keeping a positive tone and empathetic tone with logical consequences. And again, on the handout, there's some general examples. Certainly I'm not going to read through these, but I think it's important when we talk about logical consequences to recognize that we're focusing on a student behavior, and we want to have the communication with students about what makes sense as a follow-up, as a possible consequence. And by no means are the logical consequences meant to be a punishment, but we use it as an opportunity to teach and use that as an opportunity to also allow students to see more clearly possibly the effects of a certain behavior that occurred. And so having that conversation and having that intentional time to connect with students about what a consequence might look like, or about how a behavior might affect a classmate or affect a whole class or a teacher. That's an important time that we can kind of connect with the teacher language that we're utilizing, but also it might be more specific to a specific behavior. And so those are kind of similar to what you might have seen prior to certainly using this program. But again, the consistency and the intentional part is key to our time with our students.
And it does really weave together. I mean, when you're like dancing and singing with your kids at morning meeting, and then you're reminding them of how to be successful in a situation, and then if something doesn't go that way and you need to have a conversation with them about a consequence, you've established that positive relationship with them. You've had great moments with them where it's not coming off as a punishment. It's coming off as I care about you and I want to help you to change this behavior or to do the right thing. Which sort of falls into like what happens when reminding language and logical consequences doesn't quite work. Let's see. And Responsive Classroom does have like a very specific framework about these problem-solving conferences, where it just kind of helps a teacher to sort of break down how to address a situation when these other things aren't working. To say, I'm noticing this behavior. What might be the cause of it? What do you think? Taking that moment to say, oh, like maybe the student isn't behaving this way on purpose, or maybe there's something else going on that I don't know about, and having that moment to sit down and talk with them about what's going on, and then saying, well, what can we do about it, or helping them to see, like, now do you see that this disrupted, the other students that were trying to focus while they were working on this task, even though you finished early, and letting them think about, well, what could I have done differently? And what should I do? And helping to put some of that on the student to say, okay, well, what should happen if we do it again? How can I help remind you of this? And so these problem-solving conferences help to just be very intentional about the behavior instead of saying, like, this is what you're doing and this is the punishment, the end. To say, like, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's talk about this. What could be a solution? What should be a consequence? And oftentimes students are actually much harder on themselves than, and you might find that as a parent, like that your child might be, I should be grounded, or, the things that then, well, let's talk about what's reasonable. And so, so there is a framework that teachers can, kind of use and be guided through to help with that. And that's what we call it, a problem-solving conference.
So we did hit on some of this earlier, and it kind of came up through the earlier components. But academics in our morning meeting and academics in some of these components is intentional as well. One other interesting and really, I think, powerful part of this school year is that Dr. Mathis has assigned specialists, and we haven't talked a lot about specialists and their role in this, but we should also say that many specialists are utilizing these same practices in their own areas of expertise and when our students are coming to their classroom. For example, we might just go simply next door to Mrs. Sandora's classroom for computer, and she will welcome them in a similar fashion with a morning message. and some of the components that align, again, with this program. And I think the other part that I was going to mention a second ago was that Dr. Mathis assigned a couple specialists to each grade level. And so we are having the opportunity at least once or twice a week to have either Mrs. Sandora or Mr. McCarroll come into our morning meetings and not just be a guest, but be involved in the process of morning meeting, be involved in the activities. They will lead certain days in the morning meeting procedures, and we may even go to their space. For example, last week before a STEM class, my class went to Mr. McCarroll's classroom to have our morning meeting, and we went through a very similar procedure and really enjoyed that change of environment, and it segued into a class that we had later in the morning. And so he designed the activity. We did a really cool walking code that set us up for the program later in the day. So that was a nice tie-in, and unlike third grade, every homeroom class has specialists coming to be a part and to engage with their students in a different way. I think from a specialist standpoint, I used to teach PE. I always missed that piece. I of course taught many more students teaching PE to several grade levels, but I missed that opportunity to have that one-on-one connection, to have that little more intimate classroom setting where it was just an opportunity to connect in a different way. And so we're definitely welcoming that this year.
Right, and it helps to lay that groundwork where the specialist teachers are hearing the language that we use in the morning meeting, or we're hearing language they're using and following up to say, oh, well, how did that go in computer class today? I remember we talked about that with Miss Sandora this morning, and it just really kind of gives that cohesion to the day where the specialist teachers are not separate from the homeroom teachers, and the expectations in homeroom are the same as they are in specials, and that we all have the same expectations of students, and they are high. So that comes to the program of academic choice. And so this is something that some teachers are using. I've been using it for many years and really love using this with students, and I'm doing one currently, so I'll share with you kind of what we're working on. So we've just finished a math unit on adding larger numbers, and we're talking about regrouping. And so, instead of just, having here's an activity, here's the worksheet, or here's, a project where everybody has to do the same thing the same way, the idea of academic choice is that you share with the students what your goal is. So I want them to show me that they understand regrouping, but they get to choose how they do that. So they get to choose what sort of mode they want to use, if they want to use base 10 blocks, if they want to use clay, or they want to use a poster. And then there are some steps as to how to do that. And so the students can choose, and the idea is that they have to make a choice at the beginning and they have to stick with it. So there's that idea of sort of weighing, and we talk a lot about knowing yourself, here's the amount of time we're going to have to complete this activity, what kind of time do you think that will take you, and what's a good fit for you. So they choose. So in this case, I had the students write their initials next to which one that they wanted on the smartboard, and then we launched into their work, and it's been amazing to see how giving them so little structure to that has really just developed into these beautiful creative ways of expressing that they do understand regrouping and that they can use the language and how they're doing that. And we use Seesaw to share that with families. So most students kind of finished just about an hour ago in class. So these are fresh photos where some students decided to use clay, and this student actually took a video on Seesaw where they were moving and circling and highlighting pieces to show what regrouping meant. The student decided to really take an artistic approach to it to show each of the steps on one of the leaves. This student kind of made a comic sort of step-by-step with a little emoji that she wanted to make with it. I have students that have made how-to books where they sort of took that poster idea and turned it into a book. Students who really drew comics, and other students, and as they're explaining, they're really showing the depth of their understanding. So that is shared with families, and it's shared with myself as the teacher, and it's sort of making them pause instead of saying oh yeah, I know how to solve this problem, but why? Why does regrouping work the way it does? And so I've found that when I give students this academic choice task, their focus is intense. And we have had 2 days to work on this, and both times they've needed absolutely no redirection to be on task. The room has been silent without me telling them it had to be silent. They're helping each other with ideas. Like, everything is on topic and focused because they had that choice to choose what felt good for them to get to demonstrate their learning. And so it's just one little component. I certainly don't do this every day or for every activity, but it's a nice thing to sort of have in my teacher toolkit to create that engagement and that excitement, and also that autonomy to choose how they want to show their learning. And so it is called academic choice. Did you want to add on to
Sure.
that?
I'll just simply add on to it because you hit on it right at the end. And it's not necessarily going to happen like that daily, certainly. And maybe throughout a unit you decide where would be the best academic choice part to give them that a little more in-depth, rich environment or experience. But I think, at the heart of it, the kids are feeling empowered. They're feeling that they have control over what their choice is and where their learning goes next. And even if it's not as in-depth, in a daily environment, we want to provide those choices and those opportunities for students to feel empowered and to take their learning in the directions that they wish to. And so we would provide academic choice, maybe not to that scale, but in other areas, in independent work. You can simply take an independent work time and give them choice of A, B, or C, and let them choose which they want to work first, second, or third. And really, you can see the engagement piece change, as opposed to me saying, first you're going to do this, and then you're going to do that, and now you have to finish doing this. It really does change their attitudes, and at the end of the day, they're still completing and meeting their goals and their expectations. So I would just add on that it does look different in different parts of your day. Any questions? Because we did a few slides, and I think we're going to close up here soon.
Just wanted to add one
Yeah,
more
sure.
thing about the academic choice. At the end of the activity, so next week, the students will be sharing their work with each other, and usually I'll ask them sort of reflection question, like, if you could do this again, what would you do differently? And sometimes I've done academic choice activities where students don't finish in the time given, and they might say, well, I wanted to use clay, but I tried to build all the base 10 blocks out of clay, and it took way too long, and I wasn't able to finish, so next time I probably would have done that differently. So it's sort of like a low stakes environment. It's not a test. It's not something that's graded. It's not, it's just something where they certainly might get some teacher feedback on what they've done, but it's a chance to take risks in a safe way, to say like, well, I've never really built something with clay before, and I might want to try that this time, to give them the ability to choose and then to reflect. So there's always a reflection piece. Sometimes we'll have the students, going around and looking at each other's work, giving, some compliments, or talking with each other about their work. So there's always a piece after that, sort of that looking back on, like, how did that choice go for you? Would you do it again, and what did that look like?
So we have covered quite a bit. We have one more slide that we're going to talk about, and this is some other components that we will kind of go through some examples with, and then we'll wrap up our day with any questions or thoughts to kind of close our presentation. But thank you everyone for your attention. We also want to talk about hopes and dreams, and a way that we may demonstrate and display those hopes and dreams, just like when teachers meet with parents at the start of the school year and you share your wonderful goals and hopes and dreams for the year. We have similar experiences with our students, and we want them to certainly set goals throughout the year, and those goals are connected to their hopes and dreams. Christina, if you want to click the next slide. Every teacher sort of displays theirs in different ways. This is an example of our footprints in my classroom, and next to the footprint is a little place to store their goals, which change throughout the year, and hopes and dreams that change throughout the year as we continue to sort of evolve and meet new challenges. We encourage students to update those, certainly throughout the year. What they are thinking about in the early weeks of the school year might feel far different when we reach the month of May. But we also want it to be something present and visual, so that they can become, they can remind themselves of what their goals are, and that they can see daily. I like to use it in the doorway as a focal point of where we're going and what our focus is and our attention and our goals are every time we leave or every time we enter the classroom. But every teacher, again, displays that and focuses in a unique way to sort of make it special to the kids. And certainly this was all kid created, and it's in their language, of course.
Right. And usually we ask them to think about an academic and a social hope and dream. So getting them to kind of think of that well-rounded school experience. And having done this for many years, it's always very exciting when you revisit those with kids and they're like, well, I met this goal already. I need to write a new one. And so we staple it to the old one, and at the end of the year they've got like all these index cards of all these goals that they made and met and made and met, and helps them kind of see that connection. But we use these hopes and dreams to establish class rules. So certainly we have expectations of behavior that are consistent at the junior school. But the students kind of take their hopes and dreams and think about, well, what are our expectations in our class? How are we going to set up an environment that's going to help us all reach our hopes and dreams? And I know it was very interesting for my class. I had them sort of categorize their hopes and dreams. And I think out of my 18 children, there were like 15 kids that said, like, I need it to be quiet so that I can work. And we just like stood back and looked at me like, look at what's important to all of you. How are we going to make sure this environment is quiet so that you all can work? And it's different every year. It's different with every group of children, what they find to be important and what that turns out looking like. So Mr. Stern did bring his class rules if you want to share them.
Yeah, I'll just add on to it that the important part there is also that we're using student language, and usually I would like them to create their own rules and kind of goals for the year, but then think about ways that we can collaborate and connect and find themes, and every year they sound differently. Sometimes there are, key components or big picture parts that have a similar message, and then also that after that brainstorming happens, that there's discussion around it, that there's agreement, and that there's buy-in, because this is their language, and we want them to hold themselves accountable to the rules that they feel are most important, so that they can be the best versions of them and have the best experience here at Shadyside. And so, yes, this is an example of a downsized version. Maybe in the video you saw some kids volunteered to create the poster board after we made it a little bigger and we didn't have room to display it. So we downsized it, but the messages are still there, and we definitely encourage them to sign it and have ownership in that through the process. Some also, I would say, some grades and teachers actually send a copy of their class rules with their class when they travel to a special, so that any other teacher or adult in the building is aware and can refer to the class rules that they have created for themselves.
Some other things I think that we've kind of touched on a little bit with the idea of modeling. We use a lot of modeling to show what the expectation is, and the thought behind that is, well, you can't really expect students to know what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to do it unless you've showed them first. Whether it's something as simple as like sharpening a pencil, or when are appropriate times to sharpen a pencil, or how you wait while someone's talking until they're finished and then you can sharpen the pencil, and how to walk through the room. And we model, how to behave in the cafeteria, and how to walk in the hallway, or how to talk with partners, or how to do a greeting. And it's just a really nice kind of pause, as a professional, to say, okay, like this student is doing this thing, but I never really told them that they're supposed to do it a different way. So let's, model that first. And so we really try to be proactive and do those things ahead of time, and it really sets the students up for success in what we're doing.
And just adding to that, of course, throughout the year, there's a lot of remodeling, right? And we can revisit, because one model and one example of going through a behavior or a transition, or what this should feel like, we know that lives are busy and distractions occur. So we can certainly always revisit and empower students to then model that example as well.
And usually that looks like the teacher modeling it. So just like we did with the greeting with each other, I would ask for a student to volunteer, let's do the greeting together, and then I would ask for 2 students to do it together. And after each time we would ask, like, what did you notice? And they might say, oh, you looked at each other. Oh, you didn't talk over one another. Oh, you smiled. And then when the students do it with each other, what did you notice? And it's sort of that repetition of the same things. And then, okay, let's try it. And so those are kind of the steps of modeling.
Sure. earlier we did speak more clearly on some of the examples with the social skills as well, and having that all coordinate together with those components and those parts of the day is a natural kind of ebb and flow of what we are looking to accomplish with giving them those opportunities. And it does intentionally set, back to that piece of intentionality, it does set a moment in time for us to explore those skills in direct ways, as opposed to just assuming that the kids know how to do it, or assuming that the parents must have taught them this, right? So we'll come back to looking at it in a different way.
Right. There's a really great book here called The Language of Learning. That's like it's always very close to me as a teacher, and it goes through like directly how to teach students, like how to disagree respectfully, or how to piggyback off of what someone else has said. And so those teaching of social skills really helps with the academic piece of the day, helping them to understand how to have those positive conversations where they're not like, oh, I got in a argument with my group about this thing and then we didn't accomplish what we were supposed to do, where if we can kind of back it up and give them the foundation of, here are some sentence starters, let's keep them on the wall. If you're needing to know what to say in this situation, look up on the wall and maybe that will help you. And the students really do use those resources, and you start to hear that language when you just take a minute at your morning meeting or 2 minutes to model and directly teach it at the morning meeting to set them up for success throughout the day. So that was a lot of information, I know.
Well, we did start just
yes.
a little late, but we stayed pretty close to our time frame, and certainly we're not going to have a modeled closing circle, but we definitely want to allow any time for questions, concerns, or thoughts, as we did share a lot of information. If there's anyone here or anyone online that would like to ask any questions, we're happy to stick around for a little while and have any conversations that you feel are appropriate. Jody, not sure if we had any online questions come in. Okay. Anybody here? We do have a takeaway too, if you want to use the resource for sort of that language component that we spoke about and consequence component, and we'll have these available as well. We can share those elsewhere as well. Anybody have questions? Quiet group you are.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Anybody want to
Appreciate
share anything that's like interesting to you that you didn't know before or think about before? That's always useful for us.
Yeah,
in
right.
sharing this information, anything that you found surprising or.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I'm thinking about it and reading this book that you said, The Language of Learning, and looking at how to disagree and agree thoughtfully, and it talks about cultural context. And as I'm sitting here listening to you guys, I'm thinking, does this only work for a homogenic group?
I have not found it to be the case. I mean, I've been using it for many years, and I find that, it is that laying of the groundwork for the expectation. How do we treat one another? How do we speak to one another? And when we, are thoughtful about that, I find that students are very, empathetic, and they're very,
Right.
it lends itself well to that. So I have
Yeah,
not
it just
found
seems
it
like
to
it
be.
creates like an organism.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a fluid organism I'm hearing. It's like, wow, we're like moving as a unit and all this, and then where does the individual come in?
So there's a lot of opportunities for individuals to sort of showcase their opinions or their understandings or their beliefs in the moments of sharing about a particular activity or during reflections. We see a lot of that individuality come through.
And they feel safe if they maybe diverge from the group?
Sure, certainly. And I feel that we're in an environment that, hopefully we're providing that safety element, that we're providing them an opportunity to disagree, maybe be the only one that feels differently, and that's okay, and that they're empowered to have that opinion, certainly.
Yeah, that would be great if you could do that.
Yeah. Any other questions or concerns? Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being online.